Hello and welcome to PMI's Leading for Business Excellence podcast. I'm Susanna Clark, Managing Partner of PMI, the Performance Improvement Consulting Training and Apprenticeship firm. This podcast brings inspiring stories from across the globe and from a multitude of different sectors, with great leaders who share their experience and what business excellence means to them. In this episode, I'm joined by Rosie Brighty from Divergent Consulting, whose aim is to boost productivity by making the most of every brain in your workforce. We talk about neurodiversity, what it is, and what it means for you and your people and your customers. Rosie gives some great insights on what you can do, particularly as it relates to business and process excellence, in order to unlock the potential of neurodiversity in your quest to achieve outstanding results. I'm delighted to be joined by Rosie Brighty today. Thank you very much for coming on Leading for Business Excellence, Rosie.
Thanks for having me.
So I wondered if we could just start with you giving our listeners an introduction to who you are and what you do.
Yes, so I am Rosie Brighty. I'm the founder of Divergent Consulting, who are basically your workplace neurodiversity partner. So what we do is we work with companies to help them get the most of the brains that they already have. So like we'll do this in a way that works for the business. So it could be a mixture of education, consulting, and working with the individuals.
For both myself and for our listeners, before we get going too far, I'd love you to explain, what does neurodivergent mean as we understand it today?
So, a neurodivergent person is someone who diverges from the typical way of thinking. So I'll explain neurodiversity in the whole, which is it's basically so there's so many different ways to describe it, and they're all great. But the way that I like is a simple term of it's just the natural variation in our brains, in the way our brains work. So the term neurodiversity is basically a variation on biodiversity, but just purely for our brains. So a great image that I use in training, it's actually, if you go on my website, it's like the open image on when you first go on. It's a picture of a rainforest, and it's got a load of like trees down, like the standard level tree, the typical tree. Then it's got the occasional great big tree sticking out at the top. And I think it's such a good visual representation of biodiversity, because these big trees, they're not better, they're not worse, they're just different.
Yeah.
But in having these different trees, the whole habitat is richer and better off. There are more animals, more nutrients, etc., etc. Neurodiversity is the same concept. You've got your typical brains that think in one way, and then you've got brains that think in a different way. They're not better, they're not worse, but society, the workplace is richer, better off for having them, not despite these differences, because of these differences.
Yeah. It's not that far from understanding different personality types, really, is it?
Oh, it's all
we've been
so
doing that
tied
for
together.
years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. And Rosie, I know that you originally had a career in engineering. I know you also did some work in teaching.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about those original choices, but also then how you moved into where you are today.
Okay, so you can probably see from all the chopping and changing and things, like a bit of an ADHD CV there. But I'll go right back to when I was doing my A-levels. I was getting like 90% and stuff when I was doing the tests at home. But then I was going in to the exams and I was getting like 40% and stuff in the exams. Right. And I was getting horrendous results, but it wasn't for lack of trying. And so at that time, obviously I had no diagnosis, no anything. It turns out now I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, and I've got an ADHD diagnosis as well. So all of those things were at play at that age. I just wasn't aware. Yeah. Went to the doctor and said, like, this is happening. And he said, oh, well, it's anxiety, which is so frequently misdiagnosed. But anyway, so he said, it's anxiety. What we'll do is we'll talk to the school and we'll get you your own room and extra time to try and reduce that anxiety. And I still wasn't getting 90% in the exams, but I was doing far better than I had been when I was in a room full of people with the shorter time. So brilliant. It's anxiety, cool. Then off I went to university to do chemistry. So went to university, doing chemistry, again, not doing that well when it came to exams, just because the anxiety was getting to me. So I went to the university and I said, well, this is what the doctor said. Can I have my own room and extra time? And they were like, no, we don't do that just because the doctor says. What we need to do is we do a full assessment of you, which is absolutely fantastic response. So they did the assessment and they sat down and they basically, they would give me letters and I had to say them backwards, and they'd do all sorts of like spatial awareness testing and all this kind of stuff, fantastically in-depth assessment. And then they came out with a report basically saying you're dyslexic and dyspraxic. You can have your own room and you can have extra time. And also we've got this fund for you and you can get a free laptop and you can get books and things like that. So I just went, brilliant. I've got what I came for, which was my free stuff and extra time, and I'm good to go. And then we're going to completely ignore this diagnosis in any other aspect of my life because it's got me what I needed right here and now. Yeah. So then got my degree, went to do my teaching degree, so my PGCE, and did a focus on special educational needs. So that kind of gave me a real academic understanding of neurodiversity. I loved the bits with the kids, but I couldn't continue with all of the rest of the stuff. So I ended up leaving teaching and thinking, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I want to go into chemistry. And with my creative brain and my problem solving stuff that comes from my neurodivergence, it was like, well, engineering's a clear choice. So I went into engineering. So did my engineering masters. Again, took my report with me, got my extra room, got my extra time, all that, those kind of things. And I was like, oh, this report, for once I need my diagnosis again. Still completely ignoring it. Failed some more driving tests. And then started my job as an engineer. And I was always quite aware there was something different between me and some of the other people. But it being a very male environment, I assumed it was my gender rather than my neurotype. So again, I'm just trucking on, I'm carrying through, failing driving tests. And it wasn't until I failed my 10th driving test. I was gutted. I was so upset. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And my sister was like, there's nothing wrong with you, but you are dyslexic and dyspraxic. And so what people know about dyslexia is it's people just associate it with not being able to read and write. The reason it comes with struggles of reading and writing is a dyslexic brain tends to take a long time to commit anything to the long-term memory, especially things that are the same every single time. So the reason reading and writing is such an issue for us is because it's the same every single time. And it's a procedural thing rather than like something that we're bouncing off at the time. So it's really a really obvious thing. But it also comes in lots of other procedural things can be issues for dyslexic people, which is less well known. And being dyspraxic, that's basically an issue with your brain sending the messages to the parts of your body that are meant to, so sometimes your coordination's a bit off. So you combine these two issues. And my sister was like, there's nothing wrong with you, but you are dyslexic and dyspraxic. Why don't you try and do your test in an automatic? And it was at that point, passed my first time in an automatic. And it was at that point that I was like, hang on a second, actually, there is something to this diagnosis. That was 12 years after I got my initial diagnosis that I actually started to pay any attention to it. So it's the case of, if I already struggle with coordination, why should I why do the extra steps with the gears? If I'm already struggling with procedures that are the same each time, why have to put that extra load on my memory of you've got to switch gear again and again every time I'm coming to the roundabout, which way is left and right, or I've got to give way to that way, and at the same time thinking about slowing and changing gear. It was too much for me. Just by simply removing the need to do the change in gear, then suddenly my brain was now able to do all the other stuff very safely, and I passed. And that was the first time I started to think, well, hang on, actually this diagnosis is legit. And this was just a simple accommodation I'd made to life. And now I can go from A to B in a car just like everybody else. But I just haven't got a license that allows me to do that in a manual car, which, to be honest, hasn't really impacted me.
And out of interest, Rosie, I mean, you know, what do you know? What percentage of people kind of go through the same experience as you? And I see it in several stages, actually. One is really not realising it whilst at school, you know, up to the age of 18.
Uh-huh.
And then secondly, even if they do have a diagnosis, not understanding the impact and what they can do to adapt and improve for themselves.
Most people, I would say. So I think my response of complete and utter denial probably is not the standard response, but I think that you're taught from a very young age, dyslexia is a problem with reading and writing.
Yes.
And that's it. And I love reading. I am so slow, really, really slow at reading, but I've always read for pleasure. I love it. So I was just like, well, that's clearly not me. All this stuff you learn about, that's not me. But I got that nice bit of paper that let me do my exam. So I think when the message you're being given by a doctor doesn't fit with the message society's telling you, there's a bit of disjointedness there as well, so people won't accept it. But I do think that unless you spend a long time looking into what's out there for you, or have a needs assessment where somebody sits and works out your needs, a lot of people aren't going to know what kind of things would help them.
Yeah,
because why would
they? Exactly. I've got 25 questions I want to ask you now, but rather than do that right away, so let's just finish the story around.
I'm nearly there.
So you passed your driving test. Fantastic.
Finally. So I'm 6 years into engineering. I was doing this little admin thing, and it was just a simple little task that anyone can do. And I was so bad at it. So basically you'll have part numbers for things. So when you assemble something, it's made of a lot of part numbers. And one of them might be like 2A7-12-12345. And another one's like 207-12-12345. My brain can't tell the difference between them. If someone said to me there is a difference between these, I could tell. But overall, I'm just scanning it and going, yeah, cool, all the same number, we're good. So we had to do this simple thing where we were replacing one with another. So one might be a bolt and one might be like a door. And so that's a big issue if you accidentally put a door in the system rather than a bolt. So it always would go through the manager, and so it's constantly coming back. And he pulled me aside. He said, "Why are you still making these issues?" And this is the first time I'd actually disclosed in work. It was after I'd got my driving test. After I'd passed my driving test, and I'd begun to actually believe that there was that it was legit. So I said to him, "Oh, well, I'm dyslexic and I'm dyspraxic." Again, I didn't know about ADHD at that point. So I can't really tell the difference. It's a systematic process that's the same every time and doesn't make sense to me logically. I will get there, but it's just going to take me longer. And his response was, "Oh, well, you probably shouldn't be in this team then." So cue RSD, which stands for rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is basically a strong emotional reaction to perceived criticism or rejection. I spiraled and I basically removed the probably. I was like, I definitely shouldn't be in this team. All of the things that my brain is so good at, like fault finding, over analyzing, is absolutely fantastic in engineering, because you can go, well, why has that happened? You can go and talk to that person. It could be all these different reasons. I stopped doing all the things I was good at because I'd got so bogged down in this thing I was bad at. And it wasn't actually until I left on maternity leave with my son and I got to spend some time away from that environment that I thought, well, and I was doing something I was good at again. I was with my son, I was responding to it, and I thought, well, hang on, I've got a background in teaching. I've got a background in having worked in engineering in the public sector, all those kind of things. I have lived experience. I'm actually in a position to make sure this doesn't happen again, or reduce the chances. So I then started, and at first it was just I want to get awareness out there. It was like a mission to try and get awareness, and I still was expecting to go back and be an engineer. But then as time went on, I thought, well, actually, I can teach people about this. My skill set lends itself perfectly. It's like I've been working towards this my whole life. So then I started started Divergent Consulting, and now go into workplaces. I predominantly market towards the STEM environment, just because that's my background. But I've also trained coaches and accountants and loads of different people. But the STEM environment's kind of what I know. And I find that there's a lot of people I used to work with that would be like, oh, they've never worked in a factory. Who are they to tell me what to do? But I have, so I can kind of get past that barrier, which is really valuable. So that's when I decided to do it. I still had to go back after my maternity leave to work your time so that you don't have to pay your maternity leave back. And I was under a different manager then. And I thought, and while I was on maternity leave, I got my ADHD diagnosis as well. And I went back and I said to him, ADHD, dyslexic and dyspraxic. And it was night and day. He was amazing. He said to me, oh, excuse my ignorance, but how does that look to you?
What a great question.
He asked me how it looked to me.
What a great question.
Isn't that amazing? And straight away, I felt like he was on my side, so I wanted to be on his side. And we worked so well together because he wanted to know how it worked. So it wasn't a company thing. It was just a difference between the different individual managers and how they managed me. But I tell that story and I'm just like to the managers, like that straight away, as soon as they disclosed, that sets off the whole how you manage things next. Like how the individual feels accepted. And so sort of very, very long answer.
That's okay, because I think one of the things you pull out in that story is that, this is how I feel. Okay, maybe other people feel differently, but this is how I feel from what I've heard. I feel as though over the last period of time, and I don't know whether maybe it's 20 years, perhaps, maybe not that long. I feel as though the story is also about how we have become so much more aware of the benefits, the opportunities that this gives people, and not just the limitations. Whereas I feel, particularly, I was conscious of people, when I was growing up who were classified as dyslexic. And I thought that what that meant was that not that they couldn't read and write, but that they saw the words or letters in a different order, which made it difficult for them to process it. I had no sense that there were any positives for them. I only knew the negative.
And it still isn't enough. It's not pushed enough, especially with this, so ADHD, I think, and autism, I think there's a big push on strengths and weaknesses, but I still think some of the others like dyslexia and dyspraxia, dyscalculia, those kind of things are still only seen as negatives, or largely, not only. I do think that there are so many advantages to a different style of thinking. And
we were talking about earlier about the percentage of people who are divergent, and the stats that I had seen was talking around between 15 and 20% of people are divergent. And that would mean that in your workforce, whether you know it or not, somewhere in that percentage is a group of people who might be aware themselves, maybe unaware themselves, but may also not be sharing that. And so there is a whole party of if I knew that 20% of my workforce I may not be getting the best out of, I'd start paying attention to it. And I think that's really what the opportunity is here, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a whole section of your workforce that are basically more likely to leave because they're not getting the support they need, but also more likely to, in the right circumstances, be able to give you so much more. So it's like it's like if you damned, it's like you have to both. It's the carrot and stick, basically. You might lose them, but also if you put effort in, you'll get so much more. But it's not just 15 to 20% of your workforce. It's 15 to 20% of every single stakeholder, of your customers, of service providers, of everyone. Of so if you can get this right, then those communications with all those people are going to be easier too.
Yeah, very interesting. So I've become more conscious over the last probably 2 or 3 years, and probably not much longer than that, of people talking about how this is well suited to the world of process improvement, for instance. And as you were talking about, your problem solving skills, your creativity and so on, of course, then that's what we're looking for, isn't it? In the field of, call it business excellence, operational excellence, etc. We're trying to improve the way people work. And for that, you get a bunch of people together and you ask them to look at the way that they work at the moment. Now, obviously, then what we're looking for is creativity. And sometimes that's hard for people. But what I'm hearing is we could much more deliberately include in order to improve that pot of creativity.
Definitely. So just thinking in a different way is creative in it, and it's set on its own. So the more people that are giving different ideas, the more solutions you can look at. But then also when you've got different brains that just are stray from the norm, have different strengths. So you'll get some brains who they've got so my son's dad's autistic. His working memory, the amount of information he's able to hold in his brain at that moment in time is phenomenal. So he can be thinking about loads of things at that moment in time and manipulate them and work on a problem that someone that can hold a typical amount of things wouldn't be able to. I, on the other hand, have a pathetic working memory, and I can probably only hold about half of what a neurotypical person can. So I have to employ other techniques to get around that. So that's his great way of problem solving. But then a dyslexic brain will tend to come up with multiple responses to everything in our brains and then decide which one to say or not, and just say whatever
gushes out
is there. But in a problem solving context, it will generally be we could do that and come up with loads straight away, and that creativity is a different way of problem solving. So loads of different brains can come across the same problem and approach them totally differently. If everybody did it in exactly the same way, then you're going to lose that.
Yes, very interesting. So, with this in mind, how would I go about understanding how I could get the best out of a team in this way? We're a small organisation relatively. We have a team of 50 currently. But imagine, if you're talking to somebody in a larger organisation, what are the things that we can be actively doing to encourage making more and giving more opportunity for neurodivergent thinking?
The first thing, I think, and I won't go hugely into this, but the hugely important thing for companies to do are to create a sensory safe environment. So by that, I mean, our senses are kind of what we take. They're our kind of first port of call. That at our most basic level, we're responding to information from our senses, and we're constantly assessing the risk from that. If your working environment is a sensory nightmare, then you're going to be people are going to be responding to those senses, and at their base, going to have to be dealing with what their bodies are thinking is risk. And unfortunately, often neurodivergent people are more susceptible to this overstimulation. So a lot of people love working from home and things like that because they can control that environment. But there's also a lot of pushes for companies that wanting to get people back into work for the social aspect and things. If they can make a workplace more sensorially safe, that'll help people feel more comfortable coming back in the office because they can actually focus on their work rather than worrying about being in an open plan office or all the kind of things. Anyway, I won't go too much into that. The other thing is communication. So if you're in an environment where no one's allowed to say what they need to do their best job, then they're not going to explain that. You do all these, you get loads of workplaces do like disc profiling and all those kind of things. They're all similar ways of saying, well, what are my needs in terms of communication? What are my needs in terms of rest and all these kind of things? They're all just ways of getting your needs met. And once you're in an environment where you can communicate that, and you don't have to fill in a form just to get a mouse that fits with your style of movement, and if it's just, if the barriers are removed to just meeting your own needs in a simple way, then you can already get such a huge jump in people just being able to get on with their jobs. Yeah.
So there's two parts. It feels like there's two parts of this. One is about knowing yourself and having, I guess, as the confidence then to be able to articulate that. So that's really that's two things in one. But that you need to be able to know yourself, know what you need, and then be able to articulate that to others. We also need people in the workplace to create an environment where they are aware, they are informed, and are therefore able to ask the great questions. A bit like your manager when you returned to work, even though he didn't understand or know much, but he did know a great question to ask you in order to start the conversation.
Exactly.
So it doesn't have to be complicated, does it? It's about an awareness of being willing to engage in those types of conversations, not frightened to engage in those conversations.
And if you were asking for something and it was really difficult to ask for, would you then ask again?
I don't know.
So if I was in a situation where I'd asked for something and the person I was asking for was a bit funny about it and like, well, I suppose the next time I came to ask him for something, I might think, I probably don't need that.
Or
I'm sure I can make do without it. Then I'm going to do a worse job because I'm not getting this small thing that's helping me with productivity. So it's just creating a culture where it's fine to ask, and a huge part of that is as well senior management modelling that it's okay to have needs and to ask for them and have them be met. It's okay to take advantage of flexi time some months, some weeks, if you basically showing that what you want your staff to do is look after themselves, and that's the same thing you're doing. Because how are they going to look after themselves if they don't know how to?
In terms of thinking about sort of, how we can help within organisations, I'm interested in your thoughts on the generational gap. Difference, perhaps, is a better word there. So I was talking to my one of my daughters, she's 28. I was talking about the fact that you and I were going to be having this opportunity to work together on this podcast. And she was talking about her experience and was saying that what she notices in the environment in which she works is that there is a generational gap in terms of the natural understanding. So she was saying people of her generation, they have a different language that they use. They are much more open to difference amongst people in all ways than the older generation. Has that been a similar experience for yourself?
Huge, really, especially being in like the northeast manufacturing environment. It is very much the older generation are kind of we've always done what we've always done, and it's worked, and so and this newfangled diagnoses, whereas the younger generation, and this isn't my generation, this is younger than me, like my young cousin, they're almost to the point where they're accepting and they don't even need a label. They're just like, people are people, and that is the aim. That's where you want to be. But they're also in a situation where they have so much overstimulation and so much homework and stress and social media and things that I think they have to be more open with the mental health side of it and the personal needs because everything's so exposed for them.
Yes, I was interested when you talked about the sensory overload. I'm a governor at a school and they've been working on redesigning classrooms from, genuinely what they thought was the best thing in the world, which was to have all of the students' work up on the wall, et cetera, et cetera, and their increased understanding of what sensory overload means to certain groups, and therefore making changes, but also making changes no longer requiring all the students to always sit at a desk, that they can stand up at a table if they want to now, or they can lie on a beanbag and take it from there. And they're not seeing any depreciation in the learning. In fact, they're seeing an improvement. And yet, if you wrote home to a bunch of parents a few years ago and said, we're going to be introducing the opportunity to stand up or lay on a beanbag during a maths lesson, I think the parents would think the school had gone mad. But they've had fantastic results from it.
Yeah, when I look back to being a teacher, I had my kids all sat cross-legged in front of me, and I had different methods for each of them. Like one kid, it might be like, can you sit properly? Like, can you sit nicely? I'd say it to that child. Another child, I couldn't ask them directly because they'd kick off. So I'd say to the kid next to them, aren't you sitting well? Then they'd look at them and they'd join in and sit. And I was so proud of myself because I was like, I've got the whole class of kids that are sitting wonderfully. Now I look back and I think, oh my goodness, I was forcing so many of them to be uncomfortable and not learn. But obviously, you don't know that until you're taught.
So we're if you an organisation we're talking about, that we've got a wide group of people. We've got not just only our own internal percentage of neurodivergent people. We've also got, as you said, areas that I hadn't even begun to think of, such as our customers. We teach that you really should think about your customers first. So I'm disappointed in myself by that. Your supply chain and so on. So how do we start thinking about addressing those areas as well?
It's the communication piece. It's if you make all your communication outwards, that we accept this. So when you're recruiting, if you say, not saying, is there anything we can do for you? Because then that's a yes/no question. Saying, what can we do to make this to get the best from you? Having open questions that the candidates have to respond to. Immediately, people are coming thinking that you're a more open company. So if it's the same with you, say, when you're talking to, say, a supplier and you say, what's your communication preference? Should we do this over the phone or should we do it over email? Would you rather meet? Just asking these kind of questions, getting them communication from the get-go. And the same with the things you're sending out, like what kind of fonts are you using? What kind of visuals are you using? If you're using loads of visuals of people looking down the lens, but it's not adding anything to your message, you may be encouraging those that don't like making eye contact to automatically look away. They don't even realise they're doing it. Just eyes make them feel uncomfortable, so they'll look away. And so it's just all your constant messaging, just checking that are you doing anything that might be putting people off.
And then let's go back to the world of performance improvement, as in business performance improvement and process improvement. So with your own background as an engineer, you were familiar with following processes. You talked about the problem you had recognising part numbers and so on. Totally understand that. Yeah. But what would your advice be for people who are working in process, particularly, let's say, a quality manager, a CI consultant? What are the sorts of things that they need to bear in mind in order to support people who are neurodivergent? What sort of problems do those people face with standard instructions, for instance?
So I think it depends on the kind of processes. So you might have processes that are it has to be the same every single time. So these might be like calibrating a machine or picking parts in a factory. You've got to there's a very rigid system that's followed in order to make sure if something goes wrong, we can spot where it went wrong. And those processes exist for a reason, and that they're necessary. It's about putting in cues for people. So if you've got somebody who's terrible at following instructions and never going to remember, I do this, then this, then this, then this, if they don't logically follow on, they're kind of constantly checking back at the notes, checking, where was I? It's going to take forever. Yeah. Whereas when you just put in little cues of this is next.
And so what I think is interesting, Rosie, is that at the heart of really great, process management, for instance, it's full of teaching people around visual cues, visual signs, audible signs, and so on to help. And actually, it doesn't sound as though it should be far away from being able to cope, as long as people are using those systems well.
I think the thing is, you need enough flexibility in the system that it can meet different people's needs and different people's way of understanding things.
Yeah.
But enough rigidity in the system that it's standardized. So, but again, this is only for talking about processes that have to be standardized.
Sure.
But the 5S is do you know 5S?
Yes.
It's a standardization technique that's often used by engineers to basically, on the shop floor, do things really well. I can't remember what they all stand for, but it's like standardize, shine, things like that.
Yeah, if we can do that I should be able to tell you what each one is.
If we can do that in our offices and we can pay attention to those same 5S's, we can do this really well. If we could it would be really inclusive to be able to have, say, a file organization system that made logical sense.
Yes.
But we don't. We just have chaos everywhere. So standardizing things can be very inclusive unless it's standardized to the point where it's actually going against someone's, like if it makes no logical sense and it's just that is how it's always been, that can put a lot of people off and make it really clunky, and you're basically just getting not a very good performance out of anyone.
Yeah.
Or there might be a way of doing something that works really well for someone else and works terribly for a different brain. But all that actually matters is the output. So can those people just work towards the output so long as that's really standardized and understood? Do they need to get there in the same way? Yes. It depends on what the actual thing is.
Yes, and we, but processes that are well designed should be able to cope with some degree of variation that's understood at the right points. If I think about nothing to do with the person themselves, but if I think about designing a process where we run that process in the UK and we also run the same process in Greece, let's say, as an example, there may be different requirements to the law in Greece, regulatory requirements, whatever, compared to those in the UK. And so we have to design a same process, but we take into account different localized requirements. You're talking about the same thing, but from a person perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So long as you understand what the aim is.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people can get caught up in the process to getting there.
Yes.
And you can understand that because there's been a long time spent creating a process that is the optimum.
Yes.
But it isn't the optimum for everyone. And so it's understanding that actually, can we look at the results that this person is producing? And can we use that to measure them rather than how they got there?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can imagine that that's sometimes a difficult conversation to have in certain environments. So it needs real thought and to be done well, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I've had a lot of the discussions with people who are of the thinking style as it should be done in this way.
Yes.
But then eventually, when you get down to it, with the thing that everyone loves the most, cost, you're going to be saving money by allowing people to get the best results.
Yes. And there is something about, coming back to that creativity side of it, that who knows, actually, it could be something that is a new best known way standard for everyone, couldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you're not letting people, if you're following a process that worked perfectly 15 years ago, who knows what's changed since then?
Well,
that actually,
yes,
improvements could be there.
Yeah. And so, in your experience, I'm interested. Have you got an example of your favourite or favourite or most, the memory that makes you most warm, if you like, of creating a change in this sort of way that's had results that weren't anticipated?
So we got we brought on a new parts supplier onto the site, and I got to be a huge part of designing the layout of the new place. And because I have such a poor working memory, I can't retain much information at any one time. So that allowed me to create a system where parts could be picked, and it would basically help create a really streamlined system that kind of was a bit idiot proof, because I was the idiot I was modelling it on. And I'd be like, I'm not going to remember that this is what this part does and this is what that part does. So then it ended up, because of different constraints, it didn't end up going like the exact thing that I'd proposed going forward. But being able to come up with something that made sense to everybody you talked to about it, it was just like, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I get that. So, and that couldn't have been done by somebody who would have had the ability to think of more than 3 things at once.
Yes. Interesting. Yeah, very good.
So that was a real, yes, go my brain kind of moment.
And over the time that you've been working in this sort of field now, who's been your inspiration?
So I absolutely love Nancy Doyle. So Nancy Doyle, she's the founder of a company that do what I do, but on a much larger scale. So they're called Genius Within. They're fab. One of the things that's so great about them is that they have like people that work all over the country, whereas obviously me being a sole trader, that means I'll work with smaller companies that can have maybe a bit more bespoke, but I couldn't do Coca-Cola, say, whereas Genius Within can. Yeah. So she founded Genius Within. She she's now gone on to do a PhD around neurodiversity. She's got really into the research side of it, and she's stepped away from running the business. She's now got someone else whose name I can't remember, but Jackie she's called. She's great. So Jackie's running Genius Within now. But Nancy, everything she says is so well thought out. She does all the research, and she just approaches it all with a lot of respect. Like there's some people that have approached things maybe with an us and them approach, whereas it's not us and them. It's people, and people have needs. If you can have a neuro-inclusive environment, you can support pregnant women, you can support people with Parkinson's, you can support someone who's doing Ramadan, who's suffering with executive dysfunction because they're hungry. All of the protected characteristics can also be supported by being neuro-inclusive. And so I just love her approach to all of that. So my answer is Nancy Doyle. Yes, love her.
Thank you. And I guess my last question is, and it's been fantastic talking to you. I could talk for hours, but I'm conscious that at some point we need to come to a stop. My last question is, if you look forward into the future, I mentioned earlier about sort of thinking about how much more aware, obviously, we've become in recent years, and seeing the positives, not just understanding the challenges associated with neurodiversity. So what do you see the future might look like?
A perfect future. I imagine people being neurodivergent, it just being something we don't even discuss. It's just, yeah, that's what they need. In the same way as we don't discuss that people wear glasses. I sometimes need glasses when I read. No one's going, oh, look at you, you're demanding things. It's just, that's what it is. That's what I need. No one has a problem. That's a reasonable adjustment.
Yeah.
So I would love it if life could just be people understanding each other have different needs. It does feel like it's moving more towards that. But there's definitely a long, long way to go. And I think one of the issues is some people assume that people are trying to take advantage of accommodations, when really often, not always, there will be the occasional person taking advantage, but often it's people just trying to be better at what they're doing, just trying to get rid of something that's holding them back. So everyone kind of having more of an appreciation for that.
Yes.
Let's not stop the 10% that are going to take advantage. Let's help the 90% that are trying to help themselves.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know whether you've encountered this, but also the other side of the not just the taking advantage, but actually that they're being deliberately difficult.
Yeah.
Is something else that I've heard.
Why would somebody be doing that? Why would somebody be coming to a place of work every single day and deliberately trying to have a bad time? There's obviously something at play that's causing that. And even if they are maybe saying, I need this thing, and something else might fix the issue, not that thing, they're just desperately trying to solve a problem, and somebody else just saying, oh, you're deliberately being difficult, and that just doesn't feel like it's going to help anybody.
No, it doesn't. One of our core philosophies is based upon the fact that we believe most people come to work to do a good job every day.
Yeah.
If you believe that, start with that, then that will enable you to ask better questions if something seems to be getting in the way of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rosie, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been fantastic having this opportunity to talk to you. You've stimulated my thinking and also made me want to learn more about this to see what else I can do. And I really thank you for that. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed this Leading for Business Excellence episode. If this has inspired you to think about the challenges your leadership team face and how they respond, do get in touch via team@pmi.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you, or else take a look at our website and our leadership team development program in the training section. Thank you very much for listening.